When I was 9, my brother shoved me down the staircase, and I ended up with a fractured wrist. He wept when our parents arrived, claiming it had been unintentional. I ended up being punished for supposedly starting the conflict. That sort of pattern was normal in our family. Elias would cause the trouble, and I was left to handle the aftermath, or sometimes bear the blame myself. He always wore a dazzling grin, could spin quick fabrications, and seemed to carry an untouchable halo that no one ever questioned. I was the one who made the air heavy with discomfort. Elias managed to sidestep consequences for everything: skipping classes, sneaking cash from my father's wallet, speaking rudely to my mother. They'd pass it off as typical boyish behavior. Meanwhile, I was given stern lectures for being overly emotional, for caring too much, for having feelings that seemed overwhelming. Whenever I was upset, I was accused of trying to attract attention inappropriately. If I tried to defend myself, the blame was placed on me for disrupting any possible calm in the home. By age 12, I had figured out that staying silent was the safest way to keep the peace. My bedroom became my refuge, a place where I locked the door, slipped on headphones, and let homework be my only escape. My brother barged in at any hour, grabbed anything he fancied, and found amusement in the chaos he caused. My parents hardly paid me any attention. For my birthday, I'd receive a gift card and a stiff embrace, while my brother enjoyed celebrations packed with energy and all eyes on him. Each year, I withdrew a bit further into myself. At 19, I stuffed my possessions into just 2 bags and walked out without any destination in mind. I couldn't keep pretending our house was truly my home. Nobody came after me. No one reached out by phone. It almost felt as if they had simply been waiting for me to disappear. I survived by crashing on friends' sofas and piecing together part-time work, growing accustomed to having very little and embracing the quiet. It didn't quite feel like liberation, at least not yet, but it was the closest I'd come. Years later, after everything collapsed and I'd run out of options, I foolishly reached out to them. When the hotel closed down without even calling us into a meeting, we just got a mass email and a final check that barely paid the rent. I had 4 weeks to decide where I would live. My roommate quickly packed her things and moved back in with her parents. That wasn't an option for me. I sold off my belongings where I could, gave the rest away, and spent the remainder of my savings on an old camper shell for my truck. The camper shell leaked in the rain and carried the scent of damp cardboard, but at least it was my own. I reached out to my mother and asked if I could stay in their driveway for a couple of weeks. My mother was unsure, explaining there was too much happening at home. My brother and my sister-in-law had taken up residence there, and the house was already packed. My sister-in-law followed up with a message the next day. Hope the truck bed's cozy. I found a Harbor Fresh Market parking lot where they wouldn't tow, and I figured out how to make my meals last using just a cooler and budget instant foods. I secretly plugged into the outlets at Grace Street Chapel and used the all-night fitness center to shower. That was the lowest point I had ever experienced. Yet, in that stillness, I discovered the art of surviving without relying on anyone else. I figured out my basic necessities and realized what hardships I was capable of withstanding. I got used to sleeping through the noise of sirens and waking up without anxiety. I didn't realize it at the time, but that little camper, the very one they ridiculed, was actually my first real possession. A job opportunity came up through an acquaintance who had a connection at Rapid Box Dispatch Depot in the neighboring city. It wasn't a dream job, just handling packages, driving forklifts, tackling both early mornings and long nights, but it paid better than minimum wage and didn't pry into my life. The manager, a tall man named Byron, with weathered skin and a raspy laugh from years of smoking, shot a single look at the camper. I sat quietly on the tailgate of my truck, simply acknowledging those around me with a nod. I always parked by the rear fence at the Rapid Box Dispatch Depot, out of sight where people rarely glance twice. As long as I arrived punctually and kept quiet, nobody said anything to me. That predictable schedule became my anchor. My days began before dawn, pulling on work gloves, hefting pallets, and focusing on my tasks. Nobody was interested in my background or where I stayed at night. They only cared if I showed up and did my share. I never slacked in that regard. I took on every extra hour of overtime I could find. I covered each weekend shift that everyone else tried to avoid. I genuinely had nowhere else I was needed, and keeping up with work helped me avoid wandering thoughts. When the cold set in, the manager, a tall man named Byron, allowed me to plug a heavy-duty extension cord into the side of the building so I could heat my space with a small heater. I promised the manager, a tall man named Byron, that I would cover Saturday shifts for free to make up for the electricity. He simply waved it off. I didn't really mind, but I worked Saturdays anyway. Gradually, I started building up my savings. I purchased new tires, put in fresh insulation for the camper, and joined the all-night fitness center just so I could use the showers. On weekends, I would sit inside my camper with a hot drink, listening to the rain pounding on the roof, a comforting sense of safety washing over me. It offered more than just protection from the weather. It was truly my own space. I made sure to keep my life tightly contained. No phone calls went to my family, and I never posted anything on Weybridge Social. Eventually, I lost interest in whether anyone even remembered I was around. What once felt like an unbearable silence gradually became a kind of liberation. For several months, I lived that way, disciplined and serene. Then, one evening after a long day at work and a peaceful walk back to my truck, I caught sight of a flyer posted on the break room wall. There was a listing for a small nearby house at a reasonable price. I nearly left the number behind, but before I knew it, my hand had reached out to grab it. The house wasn't anything extravagant, just a 3-bedroom prefab with weathered siding and a drooping front step, but it had plumbing, a solid roof, and walls that belonged to me. I invested almost all the money I had managed to save in the down payment, then wept in the loan office parking lot when the paperwork was done. My tears didn't come from sorrow, but from a mix of exhaustion, shock, and relief. For several days, I kept it a secret from everyone. I would simply drive by in the evenings and watch it rest silently under the soft glow of the porch light, as if it were patiently waiting for my return. When moving day finally arrived, I spent my first night inside sleeping on the bare floor, bundled in 2 blankets with only a space heater humming nearby. I hadn't slept so well in a very long time. The following morning, I pulled the truck into the backyard and unhitched the camper from its bed. I gave it a thorough cleaning, draped it with a tarp, and placed it close to the fence, an unobtrusive symbol of everything I'd achieved. 1 week after that, acting on a whim, I shared a picture on Weybridge Social. It was just the porch light and the house number. I had no expectations when I posted it. A handful of people hit like, and I received a note from a former colleague. After that, nothing. 4 weeks went by, and they arrived. My brother and my sister-in-law, along with my parents, all showed up at my front door as if we were gathering for some family celebration. I hadn't ever given them my address. None of them had actually asked for permission to visit. When I opened the door, still in shock, each of them swept past me before I could say a word. They wandered from room to room, behaving more like sightseers at a furniture showcase. Nadia leaned in to quietly say something to Elias and let out a chuckle. My mother nodded approvingly, her face lit up with a smile. "You've got a lot of space for just one person," she remarked, tracing the wall of the hallway with her fingertips. My father was stationed in the kitchen, surveying the space as if he was planning how he'd reorganize the cabinets. I barely spoke, simply shadowing them from one room to the next, my pulse racing and my mouth parched. It felt as though I was witnessing a gradual takeover, After they were finally gone, my brother paused by the doorway, resting his hand on the trim. "We'll catch up soon," he said. "There's something I think you'll want to hear." The following afternoon, Elias stopped by alone, carrying a takeout coffee cup and displaying that effortless self-assurance that had always fit him, just like his signature jacket. Without bothering to knock, Elias rapped his knuckles once and let himself in, as though this was still the house of our youth, and I was just a guest. "I've been doing some thinking," Elias announced, easing himself into my kitchen chair with the casual ease of someone who owned it. "This place works out for us. It's nearer to my work, and the schools are better. You have the spare bedrooms." He took a drink and flashed a grin as if he'd just handed me a golden opportunity. "By the way, Nadia is expecting again. So yes, we could really use the extra room." I looked at my brother, waiting to hear the joke. But he was completely serious. "Of course, you'd still be living here," he said, gesturing with his hand as though everything was already agreed upon. "But for the baby, we'd need the largest bedroom. You could have the smaller one. Or honestly, maybe just move back into the camper for now. You were happy living there before, weren't you?" I didn't reply. He leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers on the tabletop. "Naturally, we'd need to set some rules. There would be quiet times, and no visitors unless you checked with us first. We'd share expenses for groceries, but since Nadia handled the cooking, that was an advantage for you." That was the moment something inside me gave way. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It just felt like a wire quietly snapping. I'd felt restricted for far too long. I pressed my hands flat against the table and stared directly at Elias Rowan, my brother. "No," I responded. Elias looked taken aback and puzzled. "What do you mean, no?" he asked. "I mean, you're not moving in here. You won't be rearranging my place, imposing rules, or making me sleep in a trailer so you and Nadia can play house in something you never worked for." Elias's grin wavered. "Anais, be reasonable." I had spent my entire life being reasonable. "I stayed calm when my mother let you lie about breaking my wrist. I was patient when you took the money set aside for my college plans to fund one of your ventures. I even tried to remain understanding when all of you left me to live behind the Rapid Box dispatch depot and didn't bother to check on where I was staying." Elias tried to say more, but I refused to let him speak. "This house belongs to me. It's mine. You don't get to simply arrive and claim ownership." My brother left without finishing his cup of coffee. For the first time in ages, the quiet that lingered afterward seemed like something I had decided for myself. It was Monday evening when I pulled into the driveway and sensed immediately that something was off. My doormat was askew. The porch light was glowing, and unusually, the living room blinds, which I usually kept closed, were wide open. I inserted my key into the front door, but it wouldn't turn. I tried again, slower this time, my hand trembling. Still no luck. I made my way around to the side of the house and spotted my brother's truck parked at the curb with its tailgate down. Peering into the house through the window, I caught sight of my sister-in-law, Nadia Jafari, piling boxes in my hallway as if she had lived there forever. My brother, Elias Rowan, appeared behind her, holding one of my blankets. They weren't just in the process of moving, they were already settled in. I rapped firmly on the door, once, then again. Nadia turned and gave me a smug grin. Elias came to the door, not even pretending to be ashamed. "Why are you here?" he demanded, as if I was the intruder. "This is my home," I replied, my tone icy. He displayed a crumpled and stained piece of paper. "You put your name on this lease. You said we could stay here for a while." My name appeared at the bottom in scratchy handwriting. The signature wasn't even similar to mine. "That signature is a fake," I told him. Nadia stepped out from behind him, her arms folded and her stomach gently visible. "Don't exaggerate, Anais. You left the place unlocked. All we did was make it legal. I grabbed my phone and hit record. My brother tried to shield the camera, but I kept filming. "You're on my property," I said steadily, "and you damaged my lock." Nadia lunged and knocked the phone from my grasp. It crashed to the ground, still filming. I dialed the police. They showed up within 10 minutes. I presented my deed, showed the text messages, and even pulled up the Weybridge social post featuring the house number and date. Elias stammered and attempted once again to present the counterfeit lease. Nadia shouted at the police officers, insisting that I had abandoned the house. Their attempts to persuade the officers were unsuccessful. The officers instructed Elias and Nadia to vacate the premises at once. The police watched as my brother and my sister-in-law silently hauled their belongings back to the truck. My sister-in-law kept murmuring threats beneath her breath the entire time. After I closed the door behind me, the residual warmth in the house lingered from their presence. I double-locked the entrance and stood in the hallway, my pulse thundering as though the very walls needed a reminder of their rightful owner. I thought no one would care, but then the remarks began. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years started contacting me. An aunt from Nevada wrote to say, "Now everything is clearer. I always wondered where you'd gone." Even colleagues at my job saw it and commented, "Well done. That was courageous." In the meantime, Nadia disappeared from Weybridge Social. Elias grew silent. My parents, Dr. Marlene Bennett and Colin Bennett, withdrew into their own world. My parents stopped sharing their usual Saturday brunch snapshots. The absence of their posts spoke louder than anything they could have written. Then one evening, my mother and father appeared at my door. No heads up, no apology. "Elias is having a tough time," my mother told me. "You're making things worse." My father chimed in, "You've made your point clear. Can't you drop it? Do it for the family." I met their eyes and for the first time stood firm. "I am doing this for the family," I answered, "the side that never tried to take from me." They were left utterly silent. At that instant, my cousin Danielle pulled into the driveway. She got out of her car and quietly joined me. That marked the final occasion when my parents tried to make me feel guilty. Later that same weekend, I decided to make a duplicate of the house key for Danielle. 7 days after that, my brother messaged me as if nothing between us had ever occurred. "Hey, can we have a conversation? It's about the children and the rent." I agreed to see him in the driveway. He arrived alone, his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes flickering everywhere except in my direction. He explained that my sister-in-law wasn't employed at the moment. Their children were quickly growing, so formula and diapers cost a lot. They had simply gotten behind on things. He didn't ask to come live here again, only for some financial help. "Even a few $100s a month would make a difference," he murmured, his tone practiced and unsteady. I kept my voice steady. I stayed calm. I led him through the numbers on my spreadsheet, explaining the price of property tax insurance, along with the repairs I had already completed. Next, I presented him with a roster of the tenants scheduled to move in. I had begun leasing the rear room in the basement studio to 2 co-workers. They were quiet, reliable, and always paid promptly. I told my brother plainly that my finances were limited. I hadn't purchased this home to act as a lender for someone who had tried to take it from me. My brother didn't protest. He simply pressed his lips together, nodded, and strode back to his truck. Several days afterwards, my sister-in-law drove past and shouted from her car window. She called me a thief, a traitor, and a heartless, barren witch. I remained at the kitchen sink, watching her through the curtains, and stood still. The renters showed up later that day with their luggage and bags from Harbor Fresh Market. One of them baked bread and, without being asked, offered me a loaf. The other tenant watered the grass out front before work each morning. The atmosphere in the house had shifted. It was crowded yet hushed, full of life but serene. That evening, I pulled back the canvas on the camper and let it breathe. I didn't realize it at the time, but I would need it again soon. It just wouldn't be for myself. The gossip began quietly, little more than soft comments from people who had some connection to Nadia Jafari, perhaps through work, the neighborhood, or friends. Then someone passed along an image of a conversation that made everything unmistakable. She had been involved with another man, not recently, but for much of her marriage. I knew Elias Rowan had refused to accept it. He kept insisting it wasn't true until the evidence became undeniable. The timelines didn't add up. The child didn't resemble him. At last, a DNA test settled the matter. The youngest wasn't biologically his. When the findings arrived, something inside my brother Elias shattered. Nadia responded badly. She hurled objects and shouted at him in front of their children. When their oldest tried to intervene, she turned on him as well. Somebody ended up calling the police. They discovered her outside, barefoot and trembling, shouting into the darkness. She was taken away, while my brother remained in the driveway clutching his son's hand. I didn't make contact. I didn't feel triumphant. There was simply no need. The divorce happened quickly. Nadia apparently vanished to New Mexico, leaving the children behind. Elias moved back in with our parents. It struck me that he barely uttered a word. My mother and father stopped appearing at Gray Street Chapel. They offered no explanations or boasts any longer. That evening, I sat outside on my porch clutching a warm drink, taking in the peacefulness. I wasn't glad or upset. I just felt still, completely finished. Then a few days later, my brother found his way to my door again. But this time, he didn't come to claim the house. My brother chose not to knock. Instead, he remained at the foot of the steps. His hands were in his pockets, and his eyelids looked weighed down. I turned the doorknob and opened the door, but I made no move to let him in. He stayed on the doorstep without trying to come inside. "I'm not here to ask for the house," he explained. "I understand," I replied, holding my tongue as I waited for him to continue. "It's for Micah," he went on, referring to his son. "He's been struggling to sleep at my parents' place. There's too much commotion, too many relatives around. My nephew wondered if we could find a place with more peace and quiet. He misses being able to roam freely." My gaze drifted beyond my brother to the camper, which stood pristine and untouched beneath the shade of the tree. I remembered my own evenings in that camper, my teeth chattering as I tucked a blanket up to my chin, convincing myself that those thin walls could protect me. Memories flooded back of how living in that camper taught me how to get by when nobody else stepped in. "I'm not handing it over," I told my brother. He shook his head. "I'm not here to request it," he said. Stepping down from the porch, I beckoned for him to follow me as I headed into the backyard. I offered, "You can—" I told him to park it in the backyard so I could watch over things, with strict rules in place. No rowdy guests, no mirrors, and no overnight visitors he couldn't introduce to me directly. I documented every condition, had him sign the agreement, and filmed our handshake. My brother didn't protest. He just gave a quiet nod and said, "Thank you." "Really?" I didn't respond. I simply handed over the extra set of keys before heading back inside. He settled in that night, and by the next morning, I could hear the gentle bounce of a soccer ball on the lawn. One night, long after the children had fallen asleep, I heard a muffled noise coming from the camper. Expecting to find a mess or something broken, I stepped outside to check. Instead, I discovered Elias on the camper floor, his shoulders shaking as his hands shielded his face. "I messed up everything," he murmured. "I let her destroy what we had, and I allowed them to break us." I stayed quiet and listened to him. I didn't break in or try to stop him from talking. I remained motionless and allowed him to say everything, while the quiet grew between us, like a span neither of us would dare to cross. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he finally told me. "I only wanted you to understand that I'm beginning to see the truth. Every bit of it." I simply acknowledged him with a single nod, then walked away, leaving him there to deal with his sorrow. The following days seemed to drag on endlessly. The children lingered in my yard for longer stretches. They helped me water the garden, covered the driveway with colorful chalk drawings, and handed me bouquets made from wildflowers they found growing among the weeds. The kids didn't pry or seek explanations. They offered only their company and stayed nearby. My parents visited one Saturday afternoon. Without giving explanations or defending themselves, they just looked at me with weary, silent faces. "We made a mistake," my mother, Dr. Marlene Bennett, admitted. "You didn't deserve what happened." For once they came without asking anything of me,